Hello again, Bachphotography here, back with 14 powerful tips that you can use to take amazing portraits right now. So the first thing is fill the frame with everything that you think is important in the photo. There's no point in having lots of space that's not going to be used and isn't going to benefit the photo and make the photo any better. It's probably going to look better if you get closer to your subject and fill the frame with your subject. And you can still get lots of the background in if you want to shoot wide so you can get a nice feel of what's going on in the photo and paint a picture with the surrounding areas, but make sure that you get nice and close so you feel that connection with your subject and the viewer knows what part of the photo is the subject and what part of the photo isn't the subject. The next tip is to use color to distinguish what's important in the photo and what's not important in the photo. Use complementary colors like blue and orange so that you can get a big distinction between what is important and draws focus in the image and what can be ignored by the viewer. Just make sure you're not turning the saturation of your image up super crazy, as when you change the saturation, you're also going to change the skin tones of your model, and you want to make sure that the skin tones always look natural. So my advice is always to play with the vibrant slider first and see if you can get the desired results that you want before jumping onto the saturation and really blowing out all the colors in your image. The next tip I have for you is making sure that your composition is straight, making sure that horizons are not going through any of the model's necks, making sure that you place your model in an area of the composition that flatters them and also makes the image more interesting. For example, putting them in a lower third of the image or making sure that their eyes are in the upper third of the image. We naturally find portraits more aesthetically pleasing if it looks like something we could have seen with our own eyes in the real world. So because we look with our eyes straight and the horizon is always straight for us, we're going to find photos that are straight more appealing. The third tip I have is playing around with eye contact and making sure that your model, when looking into the camera, is really looking directly into the camera. Because as humans, we are really drawn to looking at people that give us attention and look at us directly. So when we see a photo where someone is looking directly into our eyes, it really draws attention from us to the photo and to the subject of the photo. So if you want to make a really striking portrait, make sure that the eyes are in focus, make sure that the eyes are the most important part of the portrait and they're really looking deep into the camera and then deep into the audience member who's looking at that photo. The next tip I have for you is shooting in continuous mode and shooting 2 or 3 photos in succession every time you compose and take a photo. And the reason for this is that if you take more than one photo in a row, the second and third photo tend to be sharper because you have less camera shake from the shutter moving around and from you moving around by pressing the button. So the second photo is probably going to be more sharp than the first one, and then the third photo is often even sharper than the second one. But I find that just shooting 2 photos instead of 1 is going to make a massive difference to your portraits and how sharp they are. And this is particularly important when shooting with autofocus as well and shooting at low shutter speeds at nighttime. When shooting portraits, you're going to want to make sure that there's no distractions or clutter in the background. So make sure you choose where you're shooting really carefully and have no distractions in the background, drawing focus away from your subject. If you're shooting at a low aperture, this is made easier because anything that's really far away in the background is going to be super blurry, but don't always rely on that to take awesome portraits. You really want to be able to take amazing portraits at any aperture because sometimes you're going to want to be able to see the background as it tells a story in your photo. So make sure you clean up the area you're shooting. If there's any litter on the ground or anything in the way that you don't like, make sure you move it before you take any photos. And this absolutely applies to your model and also to your camera equipment as well. Make sure that all your equipment is nice and clean and there's nothing on the lenses, there's nothing on the sensor that's going to cause a distraction or more headaches later in Photoshop. And make sure that your model's hair is in the right place, all her makeup is perfect, especially if it's on a hot day, her makeup might start losing some of its integrity. So make sure that she's got fresh lipstick on, all of her makeup is perfect, her hair is in the right position before you shoot. Because all of these things are going to be annoying and difficult to edit in Photoshop if you have to fix them later. If you're shooting outdoors, make sure to try a whole bunch of different locations and don't stick to one place for too long. If you only choose one location, you're only going to get one set of photos and you are probably going to miss the best location that you could have found. So make sure you choose 4 or 5 different locations because you never know which one's going to be the best. You never know what the lighting is going to be like when you arrive if it's outside. So make sure you have a few different options just in case the first one or the first one and the second location are just not up to scratch and you want to find somewhere else with better lighting, better backgrounds, and just an overall better area for portraits. We've already talked a little bit about eyes and why they're important in portraits, but This tip here is the most important tip of this entire list, and that is to make sure that you get your subject's eyes in focus in a portrait. The eyes are the most important feature of a person, and they are where a viewer is going to be directed initially when they look at a portrait, because you can tell a lot about what somebody is thinking, what someone is feeling, and how they're going to act when you can look at their eyes. So not only does eye contact really draw the attention of the viewer, the eyes actually tell a story in a portrait and let the viewer know what's going on and how the subject is feeling. This next tip is all about lighting, and that you want to have smooth, even light all around your scene if you're shooting natural light. The reason being that soft light is often more flattering because deep shadows and deep highlights add angular features to your subject, and that can be a good thing if you have full control over where the lighting goes and how those angles attack the face of your model. But if you are shooting with natural light and you don't have as much flexibility, having really nice soft, even light is going to be the most flattering for your subject. This next tip is about posing, and that it's always more aesthetically pleasing to have your model facing to the side so you can see the angles of their body. So for example, you could see the angles of their jawline, of their waist and hips and shoulders and that kind of thing. If you have your model straight on, their facial features are not going to look very flattering, and their body is not going to look as flattering as it could if it was contorted a little bit into an interesting shape. So next time you're shooting portraits, play around with the angles that you're shooting your model. Try a few straight on, try a few on either side of their face, see if they have a preferable side, and then you'll be able to see the differences between all three and go from there and get the best portraits possible of your model. When shooting portraits, always expose your image for the face of your model, and also make sure that the color balance of the entire image is centered around the skin tones of your model as well, because they are the focus of this image and they are the ones that should be exposed correctly and also have the correct color compared to anything else in the scene. When composing a portrait that is not a full body portrait, make sure that your crops are super intended and clear to the viewer that you intended to leave out parts of their body. So for example, if you are shooting something close to a full body, don't just frame out one hand or something like that. Make sure it's obvious that you were intending on not making a full body portrait and only have the parts of the body that are necessary to tell the story in your photo. There's a couple ways of doing this. One way is to keep the photo very straight and your camera perpendicular to your model, and that way the perspective doesn't create leading lines for the legs where a user is going to follow the legs and expect there to be feet at the end. So keeping your camera perfectly perpendicular to your model is going to help. And also in the context of legs, cutting the image above the knee makes it look like the crop was intended, and therefore will make your portrait look more professional and just better in general. So before we go on to the next tip, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content so far, and hit that bell as well. I really appreciate your support. One crucial thing you need to do, especially when shooting natural light portraits, is carefully pick the time that you're actually doing the photo shoot. The sun and its position is going to really dictate the lighting situation where you're shooting. So if you're shooting at midday, you're going to have really harsh shadows and bright highlights and that kind of thing. And then if you're shooting really early in the morning at sunrise or late in the afternoon at sunset, you're going to get beautiful golden light because the sun is going to be low in the sky. You're going to get a more even light, and it's going to be more aesthetically pleasing in most portrait situations. And the final tip of this video, which I think is by far the most important tip, and that is any of these tips that I've given you, any of these rules that I've shown you today, all of them can be broken and all of them can be bent to make your portraits better. You don't always have to shoot in beautiful soft light to get a nice portrait, or you use complementary colors in your model's outfit to separate her from the background. You can take beautiful, beautiful portraits at high apertures, and you can also take beautiful portraits not using rule of thirds and not having the eyes in focus. Sometimes you're going to use these techniques to improve your photos, and sometimes you're going to use the opposite of these techniques to add a different type of mood to your portraiture. So for example, let's say that you did a photo and you didn't keep the eyes sharp. That might actually make a dreamier, more ethereal tone to your photo, which might enhance it in certain situations. So all of these rules aren't really rules, they're more just guides for general cases, and there are always going to be edge cases and artistic flares that you can use to go against the grain and get beautiful photos and also move the art of photography further than it is today. So that's everything for this video. I really hope you liked it. If you got this far, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and also tell me in the comments which tip do you think is the most important. I think the most important tip is that any of these tips can be broken, and you can always use any of these tips in the opposite way as a stylistic choice to enhance your photos. I'm going to leave a link in the description to all the raw files from the photos that you saw in this video, so if you'd like some editing practice and try editing these yourself, you're more than welcome. So that is everything for this video. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I will see you in the next video coming soon.